We want to continue our study of the matter of miracles as it pertains to what the Bible has to say about miracles, and from the definition standpoint. We started a couple weeks ago talking about a lot of things that are purported to be miracles or miraculous events. Things that in some cases are easily explained by natural causes, such as the so-called miracle of birth and things of that nature, miraculous sports plays and things that are oftentimes ascribed to the miraculous. Also things that certainly cannot be understood sometimes, but certainly there is an explanation with regard to, you see somebody that might be involved in a car accident and that vehicle just be absolutely, mangled, and the person, the driver, walks away and, almost completely unscathed, and people say, it's a miracle. Or if the person might even be injured but in some way recovers, they say it's a miracle that he survived. And even though there's sometimes we can't understand, or our minds can't wrap around, how a certain thing happened, does not mean that is a miraculous event. And last week we looked into the definition of miracles and looked at that a miracle is an unmistakable manifestation of divine intervention. In other words, it's something that is pointed to, and it cannot be argued. It cannot be argued that it is the intervention of God. And one of the things, and some people say, well, what about that car accident? The car was completely mangled, and there's no way, they said, that he or she should have survived that. But the question is, do those things not happen numerous times every single day in our country? Every single day there are bad accidents, and around the world there are accidents of that nature that people survive. And then I thought about on the converse side of that. Sometimes there are accidents that don't look as horrific as others, and yet people are oftentimes killed instantly. I realize it happened at 186 miles an hour, but when Dale Earnhardt hit that wall at Daytona in 2001, I never gave it another thought until they came up, and said that he had died. Because I had seen 1,000 NASCAR wrecks that were all worse than that one. And yet, and guys walk away from those wrecks. And of course that one killed him. And so, on the converse side, you'd have to ask, well, what about the ones that weren't bad? And something bad happened to somebody. You say, well, where was the miracle then? And was it a miracle that they did die? Because this wreck certainly didn't appear to warrant a death, whereas another one did. And so there are problems when we start talking about miracles in unbiblical ways. But the Bible definition of a miracle is when God suspends natural law. When God suspends natural law in a way that cannot be denied, that it absolutely is the handiwork of God. And we noted, and I always give you these go-to verses. If you need one verse in your mind to file away for quick recall, Acts 4:16 is the verse that I would encourage everybody to keep in their mind in regard to dealing with people in matters of modern miracles. That those unbelieving Jews, and I think that's a significant place to begin. The unbelieving Jews that had witnessed a miracle said that a notable miracle has been performed by these men is evident to all that are in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. And so there are three aspects of a miracle that would have to be present. Are three aspects to an event that would have to be present with regard to the miraculous. Number one, it has to be notable. Number two, it has to be manifest, evident, readily seen. And then it has to be undeniable. Undeniable. In other words, we cannot deny it. We know this happened and we cannot deny it. Just like those men that witnessed the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 11. You know, they knew what they had seen and yet they still didn't believe. And so a Bible miracle has to be notable, evident, and undeniable. You know, not some guy bringing back a report from Africa that nobody has a record of. Not what you see on television. Somebody somewhere is being healed of something. Somebody now's got a chronic backache they're being delivered from it by a miracle of God. Or some nebulous idea such as that. That just doesn't fit the criteria of a Bible miracle. And then we wanted to look at the words that are used in regard to miraculous events, miracles, wonders, and signs. And these are the three words that we looked at. And the word miracles comes from the word dunamis, from which we get our extended out in English the idea of dynamite. Dynamite is powerful. The word dunamis means powerful. Appears as mighty works, Matthew 11, 20 to 23. If the mighty works that had been done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained unto this day. The idea of power, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 13. Thine is the kingdom and the glory and the power forever. The gospel is God's power unto salvation. So context determines usage. In other words, it's a word that can mean miracles, but it's also a word that doesn't necessarily mean miracles. I thought it was interesting. I went back and looked today. Virtue. This word dunamis is referred to as virtue in Luke 6:19 and 8:46 in regard to the King James, with regard to the woman who touched the hem of Jesus' garment. And the King James says he understood, or he felt that some virtue went out of him. Other translations use the word power. The word power. And so the idea of virtue or power. And then wonderful works. Have we not in thy name done many wonderful works? Matthew 7:21 to 23. New King James says, we have done many wonders in thy name. And so the word there, dunamis, is the word under consideration. And as always, a context has to determine usage. Now, I want us to go to another word. I want us to go to another word that is even more specific than this one. All right? And that is, and I told you last week we were going to skip and go to the word signs second. So on your handout or in your notebook, we want to deal right here with the word that is translated as signs, miracles, wonders, and signs, because this is it's a great word. It's one of those words that is very, for the most part, very limited in its scope. In other words, when you find it or when you see it, you have a good idea from the very outset what is under consideration. Now, I want to make sure I get this word transliterated properly. And so we're dealing this week with signs, and the word here is Simeon. Simeon. And if you have a Vine's Dictionary or a Strong's Concordance or a Thayer's Lexicon, and you want to look up this word and its various appearances, it would be Strong's number 4592. 4592. And it means a sign, obviously, a sign or a mark or a distinguishing character, to distinguish. So when we're talking about a mark, we're talking about like the mark of Cain. That's the idea there. The mark of Cain. In other words, there was something God did to Cain that was obvious to everybody that saw him. Now, we don't have any idea what that mark was. All right? There's been a lot of crazy speculation as to what it is. The Bible doesn't say. But we also have to remember this. The mark that God put on Cain was not to harm him, but to protect him. Because he said, somebody's going to hear about what I've done. In other words, I guess Cain figured out he'd live long enough that other people would be, because it wasn't about 4 of them alive, and then there was only 3 when he killed his brother, as best we can tell. But he knew he'd live long enough that somebody would hunt him down. Maybe one of his, maybe he anticipated having other brothers or whatnot. And God put a mark on Cain to keep anyone who saw him or found him from killing him. In other words, it was a token of sorts. It made a distinguishing mark to protect him. And so when we see this idea of signs, we need to understand the concept is that God is pointing to this. That's why this word is more specific than dunamis. In other words, when we see signs, it's like God says, looky right here. Looky right here at this. In other words, I am making a declaration. I'm making a manifestation at this point right here. That's the concept of the word for, that is translated signs. This word appears 62 times. All right? 62 times in 55 verses. So this is a very common word. A very common word in our New Testament. And some of the usages, I used the word token. Okay? Token. All right? And I think this is important. This is an important use of the word. Now, when we're talking about a token, we're not talking about that little round coin that looks like a quarter that you put in a machine or that gets you out of a parking deck. All right? In the Bible, a token was a symbol of an agreement or symbol of something that was going to had or was going to transpire. Okay, so when we think about this idea of token, we talk about a token pledge. In other words, we have an agreement. And used to it was, that you remember in the New Testament, said, or in the Old Testament, a man would give you his coat as pledge, as token of an agreement. But in the Old Testament, you don't keep his coat overnight. But he gives it to you in a token pledge. That's the word. That's the concept here. And look in 2 Thessalonians 3:17. Look in 2 Thessalonians 3:17. I found this use to be interesting. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 in verse 17. The salutation of Paul with my very own hand. Note, which is a, what you got in yours, Walter? Token. King James. New King James, a sign. A sign. In every epistle, so I write. So in other words, Paul used his own handwriting to verify the letter that was being sent from him actually did come from him. Now, he didn't write the whole thing. He didn't write the whole letter. In fact, in many, many cases, Paul did not write the letters that were sent. Somebody else wrote them as he gave them to him. And that's in the text. I mean, he notes that. 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 31. But note that Paul's handwriting was a sign that this letter was genuine. In other words, he wouldn't have written on something that wasn't actually his words that somebody else had written. I'll give you an example of this. Now, this never happens except but about once every 9 weeks at school. When some kid brings his report card or her report card back signed by the parent. Right? And you look, or a behavior report that's been signed by the parent. And Rhonda or Stephanie looks at that thing and they know 100% what? The kid wrote it. The kid wrote it. I mean, and there's one or two ways you know. Because you know what the kid's handwriting looks like, and or you know what the parent's handwriting looks like, or both. and they don't match up.
Or they spell their parents' name.
Or they spell their parents' name wrong. Yeah, that's usually a pretty good sign that they didn't sign it when they spell the parents' name wrong. All right, but see, that's an identifying mark. One of my favorite shows is I watch, and listen to me carefully now, Pawn Stars. All right, make sure we get there. Pawn, P-A-W-N, Pawn Stars. And I love that show because of the historical aspect to it. I love history, and I love to learn about history and whatnot. But people are always bringing stuff into Rick. That they're bringing in a book that's been signed. They're bringing in some article that's been signed, autographed by some famous person. And so then he calls in. He got to call in his expert, and the expert brings in a book, and he's got his little magnifier, and he's looking at that signature to see if it matches a known signature by that same individual. Y'all remember, was it back in the 80s when they discovered Hitler's diaries? Y'all remember the big discovery of Hitler's diaries back in the 80s? It's a big deal. I mean, it was Newsweek and Time Magazine, everybody, all these diaries of Adolf Hitler. And then what ended up happening? It's a hoax. And how did they know it was a hoax? Wrong handwriting. Handwriting expert determined that the whole thing was a hoax. So Paul said that his handwriting was a sign or a token of the fact that this letter is legit, and people were to accept it in that sense. And so the word means the same thing, but it can be used in slightly different ways. Look in Luke 23 and verse 8. I'll tell you, let's skip. Well, let's do 23:8 because Luke's really close to John. Luke 23 is really close to John 2. We won't have to turn too far to get from one to the next. But look in Luke 23. And in verse number 8. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some, what, Walter? Miracle. New King James is saying. To see some miracle worked by him. Alright? That's this word and not dunamis. In other words, Herod wanted to see something that showed that Jesus was exactly who everybody claimed that he was. Now turn over a couple pages in your Bible to John chapter 2 and in verse number 11. Let me write this text. It's Luke 23:8 for miracle. In John chapter 2 and in verse 11, in the wedding feast at Cana was the first miracle that was performed by our Lord. He turned water into wine. It says, this is the beginning of what? Miracles. This is the beginning of miracles. New King James. Signs. Okay. New King James signs. Miracle or sign. In John 2 and verse 11. What were these things designed to do? They were designed to point people to Jesus, to draw attention to Jesus and the power that he had. Now, let's look over the next chapter in John. And go to John chapter 3. And look at verse 2. Tell me again. These are the beginning of the signs, John chapter 2 and verse 11. Did these signs have their intended effect? Now, obviously, we haven't gone to the design of miracles. We're still talking about the definition of miracles. But we're making our way into the design of miracles. What did Nicodemus say? What did Nicodemus say to Jesus about Jesus? No man can what? What translation reading?
I'm not looking at it right now.
Oh, the Sean Robertson translation? It's pretty accurate. Miracles, King James. Anybody got something other than miracles? Signs. No man can do the miracles or the signs that you are doing. What? Except God be with him. In other words, these are not some type of sleight of hand parlor tricks. That's what Simon the sorcerer did. Simon the sorcerer was a street charlatan. He's the guy. He's the shell game guy, or he's the David Blaine of the first century. David Blaine is one of my all-time favorite illusionists, and there's some guys out there that are really good. And David Blaine's always been one of my favorites. Some of the things that those guys do are just phenomenal. And by the way, to talk about the difference. When David Blaine went to Haiti one time and started doing some of his little parlor tricks on the streets of Haiti, they thought he was a witch. I mean, there were little kids. He was doing stuff in front of little kids, and them little kids were just tearing down the street running away from him. And by the way, Toby Secteam did the exact same thing at the preacher's seminar in Ghana one time. Toby knows a couple of little sleight of hand tricks. All right? And Ghanaians, even Ghanaians that are brethren, are extremely superstitious. It's hard to get that. It's hard to get a lot of that out of them. And my favorite one, I got to tell this. Toby was doing some of his stuff, and then he made a styrofoam cup levitate. And he's sitting there making this styrofoam cup levitate. And all them preachers are just like, you can just hear them murmuring among themselves about what Toby was doing. And the whole time, you know what he had done? He'd stuck his thumbs through the styrofoam in the back. He had his thumbs stuck through the cup. But them guys, they thought that Toby was some kind of wild magician. But then he showed them. He just tipped the cup forward, and they could see his thumbs sticking through. And then they're like, ah! But the point was, 15 seconds earlier, their eyes were as big as saucers. Because they thought Toby had done this great thing. And Simon the sorcerer, he's a parlor trick guy. And, he's a street charlatan. But yet Simon the sorcerer recognized that what Philip was doing was different. And it convinced him that Philip was a great power, had a great power from God, as opposed to what the people were saying about him. But it says, no man can do the thing that you do except God be with him. In other words, there's no human explanation. There's no naturalistic explanation. This is an express token of the power of God. And that is the word under consideration here. Also, in a bad way, the use of this word. In Matthew 26:48. Let me just throw this out at you in a bad way, using the term. In Matthew 26 and verse 48. Talking about Judas Iscariot. It says, now his betrayer had given them a sign that whoever he kissed was the one they were to take hold of. And but again, the word is still being used in the same sense. It's identifying this person right here at this time. All right, and so Matthew, in Matthew 26:48, Judas used this. This word is described to use what Judas did. All right, going to find one more word. All right, does everybody have these? Everybody have these on your written down? All right, if you don't, I have them all right here. I got one more word. I want to look at the word wonders. I'm going to look at the word wonders in our time that we have left. A word that only appears about 16 times in our New Testament. So it's not as nearly as common a word as, say, certainly not as common as dunamis. and not as common as the word translated for sign. But looking at this word wonders. All right, the word wonders is where we're going here, and the Greek word is teros. Teros. If you're going to look this word up and use the Strong's code is 5059. 5059. The word is wonders. Again, I was working off the top of my head, but it was right. 16 times in 16 verses in our New Testament. And it appears here. This is Acts 2 and verse 22. Also, Acts chapter 15. In Acts chapter 15 and verse number I have verse 2, but I think it should be verse 4. But I've got it mixed up here. But the word here for wonders is just simply an event that creates. I know to use the word to define the word, but it is a word that means to create wonderment or amazement. Right? And so this is not the more common of the words. But it is found in a descriptive word or phrase of Christ. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved among you by God by miracles, wonders, and signs. Miracles, wonders, and signs. And this word has as its general usage the idea of the miraculous. In other words, it's not necessarily a word that like not a word like dunamis that can be used in a variety of different ways. It's more akin to the idea of signs. Not next Sunday, that's singing night. 2 weeks. We're going to come back to, and you can go ahead and be thinking about this because we've already mentioned it tonight. Is we're going to note the design of miracles. And what is the purpose of miracles? And we've already I'll throw out a couple of passages here for you. And verses 1 through 4, and also Paul's statement in 2 Corinthians 12. In 2 Corinthians 12, chapter 3 and 4, 1 Kings chapter 18,